Hello there, I'm Clifford Bates. I'm here today to talk to you about my recently published book, The Centrality of the Regime for Political Science, published by Warsaw University Presses here in Warsaw, Poland. It is my new book. It is dealing with the concept of Aristotle's treatment of Politeia, which I translate and others translate as regime. It's traditionally the Greek concept of Politeia was often in English translated as constitution, but there's an argument that to do that imposes a legalistic framework that is perhaps not useful or beneficial or helpful in for us to understand what Aristotle meant by that concept of Politeia. The origins of Politeia, it does not begin with Aristotle. Aristotle himself worked with a frame this concept that was already being used by someone. So the origins of where the concept came from is really unknown. We know one of the first usages of the term Politeia is found in Herodotus' Inquiries, where he specifically makes reference to it as being the political form and a kind of isonomia of citizens who share rule with each other, of citizens who share common life. Citizens who is tied to this. In fact, the Greek word for citizen, emerging out of the Greek word for polis, the political form that the Greek world understood, connects also with the word politeia. That is like this body of citizens. Now, this understanding very much informs this Republican tradition in Western political theory, this idea of Republican life. And many writers will point to this treatment of Politeia as this. But this is not the most interesting or useful conception of Politeia. For Aristotle, and particularly for political science, what is interesting with Aristotle's treatment of Politeia is that this is kind of understood as a kind of typology structure to allow us to differentiate the forms that a political community differ and vary amongst, to understand the variations of type and variety. Thus, this is the second usage. Now, this usage also predates Aristotle as well. Plato uses it, Xenophon, many writers before Plato, and with contemporaries of Plato, and way after Aristotle, like Polybius and Plutarch. These authors will use this concept as a means to differentiate the forms of rulers, ruling type, ruling structures. Politeia thus is understood in this variation of a particular type of rule, be it rule of monarch, kingship, rule of the people, rule of the few rich. Now, Aristotle himself takes this differentiation system of regime, Politeia, as a structure to basically help understand. This is, for Aristotle, the regime is the way we understand how the polis differentiates from each other, one from another. Now, this is because he shares with Plato the view that the regime is a thing about differences in forms. In other words, the relationship between the regime and the city is that between the thing the form and the thing itself. Polis is the thing. The form is the Politeia. Now, why is this important? This is important because this allows us to understand the nature of political life in a way, in a more contextual way. As Aristotle himself in his Physics makes out, in his explaining how do we understand anything, a thing. And he puts forth these four criteria, which we call the so-called four causes of something. And we know by the knowledge of these four causes or these four ways of understanding a thing, we have a better understanding of one, and we can therefore differentiate it from something else and understand its nature. understand its character, understand how it is, what it is. So thus, the four ways are simple. It's the material, it's the matter that makes it, what it consists of, the essential, which means the way of putting in other words, what preceded it, what is the sequence of things that emerged, that happened before it, that led to it, or that we can see led to it. Then that's like history in some ways, and for in regards to politics. The next way is the form, the way, the fundamental shape and direction it takes. The eidos in the Greek, the form, the way it differentiates. Then there is the final cause, the fourth and final, which is the final cause is the teleological, the goal it claims, its goal, its purpose, its end, what is it trying to achieve. Now, if we understand that the variations of different types of regime was also tied to the claim of what the regime sought, its end and goal. Thus, for Plato and Aristotle, there is this understanding that form and end are very much interconnected in understanding a goal of something, or how a thing will look. And therefore, what differentiates a regime ultimately is not whether it's ruled by the one, the few, the many. That plays a role, but it's not as important or essential as the goal or the end or the purpose that the regime takes. That a oligarchy is an oligarchy because the principle of the regime is that the wealthy should rule. The principle of a democracy is that all the citizens should be equal, that even the poor should have an equal say or should rule in this sense. So therefore, it doesn't matter whether in a oligarchy regime is ruled by the ruling oligarchs are few or many. In fact, maybe even many than those that they subjugate, like in the example of Carthage. These are oligarchies, okay? Whereas a situation where the poor rule, or that the poor have a claim to rule, this is a democracy, regardless whether that ruling poor is few or many. So thus, Aristotle makes the very important claim that the qualitative number of rulers as being the defining conception of rule is less important than the actual claim. Now, he's not saying that it plays no role. One of the most important elements of division of political life is the tension between the few and the many. Then this division will very much shape political life for Aristotle. But again, to understand why one regime is and why another regime type is something else is tied to this interconnection of the form and shape. Now, where Aristotle differentiates from Plato and adds another dimension is not only that there's a differentiate between one type and another type. And here Aristotle, using his knowledge of the zoology and the speciesization of animals, argues that there's also a variation within type. That there is that within a type of regime, a politeia, there is variation, can be great, and that variation could actually affect the way the regime operates. And this is tied also to a larger conception that is shared by Plato, that the idea is that the way the regime rules will also affect its characteristic. Whether the rule is accepted by the rule is accepted by the ruled. Do they consent? Remember, they don't necessarily have the concept of consent that modern political thought has, but it's present in the idea of distinction between how one rules free people. You rule free people voluntarily. If you rule people through coercion and force, you rule them like a master, you rule them like a slave. And there's something despotic, where the very nature of mastery, the word mastery from Greek, despotike, is where the word despotism emerges from. That despotike or mastery is coercive rule. political rule should be free rule. So therefore there is this distinction that's there on top of this, the nature of this thing. So therefore, even within a type of rule that is free, there can be a situation where the character of its rule is unfree. Now, Aristotle's understanding of the variation both within type and between different types shows gives a dynamic and variation that allows a deeper understanding of how regimes can evolve and change over time. Also, Aristotle shows the importance and speaks about the importance of the roles of institutions and structures by which regimes are made. Not only institutions as offices, but also laws and structures of laws in the courts. That these institutions and structures play a very essential role in understanding how one regime will operate versus another regime. Also, Aristotle makes a very interesting point that as regimes change, the institutional function of regimes change with them, and as therefore the institutions may vary. Therefore, an institution that was formed in one regime, when it's carried over to the next, it might change its purpose or its role or its function. But then, or what may happen is that it might, or it might act as a restraining impulse for the regime for going even further down the path of its direction it's going to. It may push it back to the older ways. It might conserve. It may preserve. Or it might radicalize. It might move towards a new direction. So the institutions matter. But so also the different classes in society that make up that. Because every class, how they live their lives, how they achieve their means of to live their lives through the resources they do, how they work and labor. These will promote the different classes, be they the wealthy, or the poor, be it that the notables or the many or the multitude. There's different variations of these things, and regarding tied to the way they live, the way they produce, the way they work, the way they engage in their commerce, the way they earn their resources, be they farmers, retail, salesmen. These will differentiate the types of regimes that there are. A oligarchy that rests on ranch owners is different than an oligarchy that rests its origins on commerce. So too, will a democracy that rests on commerce differ from an aristocracy? Democracy that rests on commerce is different than a democracy that rests on farmers. These will change the character of the regime as the way of life and as the way of productions alter. So too will the character of the regime. Now, this leads us to why Aristotle's understanding is still very useful today, because his understanding of the Politeia, or the regime, offers us a mechanism to understand the way variations of types change of political systems change and evolve in a very dynamic way that allows both qualitative and quantitative analysis to be done, so that we can examine it on a level that understands historical differentiation, at the same time giving us quantitative depth, as well as offering mechanisms by which quantitative analysis can be accomplished, but in a frame that is accurate and not arbitrary. This again is why Aristotle is still offers us the best way to do political science. It offers us his regime science gives us the frame of analysis, the lens by which we can accurately and not distortively examine political phenomena. Thank you very much.